We continue our readings through the Gospel of Luke, and today we move into Luke chapter 13, where Jesus meets a woman in a synagogue who has, she has a bent back. And we're going to see how Jesus ministers to her. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Dear woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then Jesus put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leader said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered him, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When Jesus said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things that he was doing. Word of God, word of life. So sometime back, people walked into a Sunday morning congregation. They were looking through their bulletin, kind of gazing through the announcements, see what was coming up during the week before the services started. And several of them kind of noticed, some of them at the same time, they noticed this announcement in the bulletin. The peacemaking workshop has been canceled today due to conflict. Isn't that the way it always is? Some kind of conflict. In fact, last week we read that passage from Luke chapter 12 where Jesus said he had come to cast fire on the earth. He had come to bring division, he said. 3 against 2, 2 against 3, father against son, daughter against mother. And we dove right into the Lutheran controversy that was making the news last week on Lutherans and what it means to be sanctuary and who does that and who doesn't do that. And I was so glad when that sermon was over. And I was so glad to get out of Luke chapter 12 so we could move beyond all the division stuff. And Jesus always coming, as he said, not to bring peace, but to bring division. So now we get into the next chapter, and it looks like Jesus is just trying to prove his point. In fact, Jesus in this passage goes out of his way to stir up conflict and division. It says he sets free a woman who was bent over by a bad back. But he does this deed on the Sabbath. You'd think after 18 years it wouldn't hurt to just wait one more day and do it the next day. No, but he does it on the Sabbath, and the synagogue ruler says, "You can't do that. You can't heal on the Sabbath. That's work. You can't do that. Jesus, you have just broken the rules." And some of the leaders of the church, they agree with the ruler of the synagogue, but most of the people, it says, most of the people disagree with the ruler. They're delighted with what Jesus is doing. So there in that synagogue on that Sabbath day, there is a division of the house. You've got those supporting the good deed Jesus has done. You've got those supporting the Sabbath law, which says don't do any deeds on the Sabbath. So what is right and what is wrong? Does it depend on what it is that binds you or how far you're being pulled down? Does it depend on whether you're a man or a woman or a child or an animal? So today we're going to go to trial with this case, with this setting, this scene that you have just seen in the synagogue. We are going to go to trial, and we're just going to look at the facts. And fact number one is Jesus is in a synagogue. That's where Jesus would be on a Sabbath. God had put it as number 3 in the list of those 10 commandments. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And so Jesus does. He goes with the people to the synagogue. The people are worshiping, and Jesus is teaching. Kind of like today. Today we began our new year of Sunday school classes, of classes for adults. Got 3 of those. We have many, many classes for our kids and for our youth. We are teaching and learning at Bethany. We celebrate that today. And so maybe back then, the people who were in the synagogue, maybe they just wanted what most Christians want today. We don't want any trouble. All right? We don't want trouble. We want to get together, sing some nice songs, pray some nice prayers, hear a nice sermon on your best life now, get done so you can get to the cafe in time to get the turkey and dressing special for the day, maybe a little buttermilk pie afterwards, and then get home in time for a nap. That's pretty nice, pretty good Sabbath. So that's where Jesus is. Fact 1. He is in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Fact number 2. At the synagogue, there is a hurting woman in the crowd. For 18 years, she has been bent over like a candy cane. She could not look into the eyes of her husband, her children, grandchildren, or her friends at the synagogue. All she could see, being bent over, all she could see was dirt and occasionally the feet of other people as they got close to her. The only eyes she could look into were the eyes of grasshoppers and beetles and small dogs and cats. No one else's eyes could she see. If she wanted to see more than just the feet of the people, she had to kind of twist her head and roll her eyes up in either the left or the right corner. She could only look at people slant. Now, I was thinking, if we all stood up today and just bent over double for about 18 minutes, let's say the length of the sermon. We're not going to do that. But if we were to do that today, if we just stood up and all of us bent over double, we could see what that does to our breathing, or what it does to our voice. I wonder what bent her back to begin with. Wonder if it was genetics, or maybe an injury. And if it was an injury, was it something physical, or was it emotional? Or maybe both, because sometimes those two things go together when there's an injury. Why was she pulled so low? And what is it that pulls you low? Or what are the things that feel heavy upon your back or upon your shoulders? The things that weigh you down. Illness, genetics, shame, worry, depression. Maybe abuse, divorce, loss of someone that you loved very much. Finances, chronically poor health. A child who has left you either physically or emotionally. What is it for you? And how long has it been? For this woman, it had been 18 years, and for 18 years, the only thing people could see was her back and the top of her head. They could not see her for who she really was, and she could not see them. And here she is in the synagogue. Fact number 3, Jesus sees her. She has come to the synagogue, and it sounds like it's probably her custom. She didn't just come because there was a guest preacher in town. It sounds like that's where she usually is. And so she was there. She doesn't ask for anything. She doesn't ask for healing. But while Jesus is teaching and looking over the crowd, Jesus sees her. He sees, and he calls her forward. And it doesn't say this, but I kind of imagine Jesus kneeling down in front of her, kind of like this picture that you see on the wall. He kneels down so that they can look at each other eye to eye. Relationships need that kind of thing. You need some relationships where you can look eye to eye with people, you know? It's the way relationships happen. And Jesus says, dear woman, you are set free from this affliction, this weakness, the literal translation, this spirit of weakness that has bound you for so long. And Jesus lays his hand upon her, and then she stands straight up. She stands straight up, and she praises God in front of all the people who are gathered. She is free. She is free at last from her bent overness. Fact 4, there is someone else in the synagogue, and this person is not free. There is someone whose soul is bent over, and it is bent over with a heavy weight. And this person is the ruler of the synagogue. The woman had a crippling spirit, but this ruler of the synagogue has a spirit of legalism. He is bound and he is bent by the law. Not only God's Sabbath law, but also all those other laws that he and others before him have made about the Sabbath. You know, if one law is good, 1,500 more will be better. In fact, there were 1,521 things on a list, the list of things you could not do on the Sabbath. I'm not saying the synagogue ruler was bad. I don't know. In fact, to me, he seems like a very faithful person. And he is trying to be faithful as best he knows how. He plays by the rules, but rules have come to rule him. The rules say, and he points this out to the crowd, there are 6 days for working. Healing is work. Ask any doctor, ask any nurse. Healing is work, and you cannot work on the Sabbath. So come, he says, come on any of those other 6 days, but do not come for healing, and do not heal on the Sabbath. This leader is, among other things, right. You are not to work on the Sabbath. That is exactly right. And there are things to be said, good things to be said about being right. Lots of people love being right. My wife says I do. Maybe you're married to one of those people who likes being right. And in fact, there are Christians, and maybe you've met some of them, Christians who believe that what Christianity is all about is about being right. And so they put themselves on a pedestal, which makes it very easy to kind of look down on other people and say, you are wrong. You are not right. So, we have this ruler in the synagogue. There he is. It's a fact. Fact number 5. Jesus looks at this ruler with all of his rightness. And Jesus says, poser, hypocrite. And he talks to the crowd. He says, each of you, think about it, each of you on a Sabbath, don't you untie your cow or you untie your donkey and you lead it to get a drink of water because it needs water on the Sabbath. How much more, Jesus says, how much more should this daughter of Abraham, who has been bound for 18 years, how much more should she be untied, unbound, set free? Not tomorrow, now. Yeah, Jesus thinks, I could have done it tomorrow. I could have not broken the law. 18 years, what does it hurt to wait one more day? But no, Jesus says now. Now is the time of salvation. Now is the time of redemption and release. Now, on this Sabbath day. Sabbath is a time for setting people free from what binds them. And it was, God laid out the law. God gave his Sabbath rule. God said that it would be a day for rest. Martin Luther reminded us it's also a day for keeping holy the Word of God. But you know what? It was also a central symbol. It was a sign to all the rest of the world. When the people of Israel would gather together to worship God and to hear God's teaching, when they came to the synagogue, when they gathered on the Sabbath, it was a sign to the world that these are people set free. God brought them out of slavery in Egypt. He brought them through the waters, and he gave them freedom in a new promised land. That was what the Sabbath was to remind them of and to tell the whole world they are set free and God has done it. The synagogue ruler had forgotten that. Or he couldn't see. He couldn't see well. Sometimes we can't see well. He couldn't see that Isaiah's prophecy that there will be release for the captives and release for those who are bound up. He couldn't see that release was being fulfilled in this Jesus of Nazareth. So, of course, Jesus heals on the Sabbath day. And, of course, the woman gives thanks. And of course, the majority of people rejoice because it says they are delighted in all the things that Jesus was doing. That's what happens. That's what happens with grace when grace comes. Grace invites us to value the law and uphold it on the one hand, and on the other hand, to suspend the law in times when mercy is needed. If it's time for mercy, then mercy wins. Mercy trumps the law. God's mercy trumps the law God himself gave. And Jesus knows what we need and at what time we need it. So in the area of law, laws are generally meant to treat everyone equally. Everyone is equal under the law. After all, justice is blind. There's that famous painting or that statue with justice holding the scales, and there is a covering over her eyes because justice is blind, equal for all. But mercy is not blind. Mercy is not blind. In fact, the mercy of God is not so much about equality as it is about equity. Equity means everyone has what they need. It may not be the same thing, but that everyone has what they specifically need. So some need healing, while others need correction. Some need comfort, while others need challenge. Some need to have more, while some need to have less. It's not all the same. God sees what we specifically need, and then out of God's mercy, God gives it. Whether it's what we wanted or what we thought we needed or not, but out of God's mercy, God gives what we need at that time. So those are the facts. But we as people of faith, we're interested in more than facts. We are interested not only what is seen, but also what is unseen. And Jesus knows this. Jesus hands this to people of faith. Sometimes you have to choose between breaking a rule and mending a life. And I'm glad that Jesus is always on the side of life. His body, no doubt about it, his body was broken and it was bent, and he was nailed to the cross according to the law. And on that cross, if you just look at the facts of it, if you just look through the trial of Jesus and you look at the facts, it looks like he was being crucified like the criminal that he was. That's what it looked like. That's what the facts would tell you. But we know through faith that through that cross, God was bending down. God was stooping low. I wear different crosses. Some of them the congregation has given me. This cross that I'm wearing today, it's bent a little. It stoops down. I like to wear this on certain days when we think of being bent low, or of God stooping low, of God bending near the earth. for all of those of us who are crushed beneath the load of sin. So the official reason, the lawful reason for the death of Jesus was that he did indeed break many laws. The major one, he blasphemed God. That was the major charge against him. He broke the laws. God's reason for the death was mercy. Pure mercy. And by mercy, I mean to forgive sin and to unbind and set free, to raise us up as on eagle's wings so that we may walk and not be weary. And raise us up not only on the day of resurrection, but also now, on our Sabbath, and the next 6 days to follow, to raise us up now, women, men, children, to have freedom, as a poet has said, to have freedom to stand up and breathe deep in the lungs, strengthened in spine and spirit. Amen.
We hope you have been blessed by this presentation from Bethany Lutheran Church in Fredericksburg. We invite you to worship with us on Sunday mornings at 8, 10:25, or 10:30 a.m. Please like, share, and subscribe this video so that you can help spread the good news of Jesus Christ.